I'm excited to talk to him today. He's got a lot of great stuff. He and I talked a lot when I was on his podcast about vitamin D and getting it from the sun. And, you can get vitamin D from a bottle. You can take supplemental vitamin D, and that may help a little bit, but really all it does is just when you get your blood work, you'll get a little extra pat on the back because your vitamin D levels will be higher, but it's not the same thing. You can maybe think of it maybe a little bit like ketones. If you ingest ketones, it can maybe turn on some things in your body that could be beneficial to you, but it's not doing the same thing as like putting yourself through the process of getting into ketosis. So once again, unfortunately, the things that we do for ourselves are always going to be more powerful than the things we do to ourselves. So you can't really just get it from a pill. But if you do live in an area where there's less sunlight, you can, supplement some vitamin D here and there, but your best bet is to get out in that sun. Oh my God.
Put those things away. Holy what the hell?
Wow.
What's up, you guys?
Are you on carbs now? Look at that.
What's going on, man? What do you got going on over there?
Oh, just trying to hide from the hysteria, talk some sense into people, write some more books, all that kind of stuff, all the good things.
Good luck.
What made you dive in full blast, full bore more recently to talking a lot about the coronavirus?
I don't even know. I think it's just no matter what's going on.
Are you fascinated by it?
I am interested in it, and I'm interested in the human response to it, and I'm interested in the epidemiology and the virulence of the virus. And I think it actually presents us with a model system, or it's very similar to many things that we're going to face in society. It's something that's going to challenge our health as a population. And just from the beginning, I thought that the response was a little strange. There's always going to be infectious insults that we're going to encounter. And why are we hiding so much from this one? Is there a real reason to do that? And the further I got into it, the more I thought, man, a lot of these pieces of this equation don't make a whole lot of sense to me. And the way we're structuring the response doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And yes, people are going to die from it. And yes, it is a virus that can harm people. There are other viruses out there that are harming us. And there are many other viruses and other infectious things that we're exposed to. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey to just kind of think about it from my own perspective as a non-virologist, non-epidemiologist, non-infectious disease specialist. But I do think that there's a lot to be learned from it.
But you also have rubbed elbows with some experts on your show kind of more recently. You've had all different kinds of people getting different data together and getting different information, and you yourself diving in and researching, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the funniest thing about the coronavirus pandemic. Who's an expert?
Right.
Who is an expert? Who has seen this before? And I saw a doctor on Instagram that did, a really satirical, funny thing. And he was also a psychiatrist, or he was practicing in psychiatry. And he said, I'm getting a lot of hate from people. They're saying, stay in your lane, man. And he said, okay, so I'm going to let the world's most preeminent virologist take the stage. And he shows just a bunch of videos of Bill Gates, who's become the world expert on coronavirus, or the person we listen to, or it's Dr. Oz, who hasn't seen a patient in 25 years and is a talk show host, or it's David Sinclair, who I've had on my podcast and is a super smart guy, but he's a geneticist from Harvard. So I'm not saying any of these people is unqualified to talk about coronavirus. I'm saying they're all qualified to talk about coronavirus, and they're all qualified to share an opinion and to think independently, and as am I. And so anytime that somebody tries to break any of us down, I think that it really just exposes that person as someone that's appealing to authority, when in this situation, we just need ideas.
What appears to be the most common thing amongst people that are getting the coronavirus and are, getting very, very sick from it?
Looking at the data as I've seen it, the major risk factor is age, but the major risk factor for dying is also age. So death is, the major risk factor for dying is age. So beyond age, and we can speculate as to why age may be the main risk factor for coronavirus, beyond age, it's very clear that metabolic dysfunction, and I will clarify what that means. Metabolic dysfunction is a huge risk factor, potentially 10x, 8x risk factor for severe course of COVID-19, which is the disease associated with SARS-CoV-2. So if we go back to age is the biggest risk factor for coronavirus. And in medical school and all of my training, we are always kind of sold this subtle propaganda that humans are just meant to break down and become decrepit as we age. It's this, inescapable march toward decrepitude that humans are supposed to get as we age. It's normal to get high blood pressure as you age. It's normal to have a heart attack as you age. It's normal to get cancer as we age. This is, I guess, one of the reasons I got so interested in coronavirus, because the narrative seems so similar to what I'd heard before around a carnivore diet, around animal-based diets, around human health in general. And a lot of that narrative seemed to be built on this assumption that humans are just supposed to get weak as they age. And I've rebelled against that from the very beginning. If you look at indigenous peoples, they really don't get the same diseases of modern society. They don't get the same chronic diseases that we do. So we know as they age. So we know that age is not really the main issue here, that age is not necessarily as big of a deal as many people want to make it out to be. Now, certainly we all die eventually. We have a finite life. But to say age is a chronic disease, or that age is inevitably associated or inextricably associated with chronic, weakening and illness, this is a narrative that I've never appreciated, because that's a very slippery slope to people just taking lots of pharmaceutical medications and not taking things into their own hands by making lifestyle changes and dietary changes and staying as strong as possible for as long as possible. When a lot of elderly people are suffering with coronavirus, I think the assumption is immediately, they're old, that's normal. And I think about it differently. I think what is common in elderly populations? Comorbid conditions, chronic disease is certainly common in elderly populations, as is nutritional inadequacy. If you look at the way that the general population eats as we age, it gets to be worse and worse. It gets to be less and less nutrient dense. How many 75-year-olds do you know who eat steak? How many 75-year-olds do you know who even eat just whole foods and plants or vegetables? And obviously, I'm not a huge proponent of vegetables, but how many 75-year-olds do you know who are making their own food, who are preparing food, whether it's of plant origin or meat or animal origin? It could even be chicken. But I think that as we age, perhaps because of the way we've been eating our whole lives, we tend to eat more convenient foods. And the adage we had in medical school was a tea and toast diet for elderly people. And that leads to tons of nutrient deficiencies. So I think that we're saying that obesity, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance are huge risk factors for severe COVID-19. And we're also saying that elderly people are at risk. But I think elderly people are at risk for the same reasons as everyone else, because they're metabolically unhealthy. They're more likely to have nutrient deficiencies. And as I've talked about in my podcast a lot over the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, these micronutrients are critical for proper immune function, as is metabolic health, as is insulin sensitivity. And we can get into all of that. But I fear that, again, and I've talked to you guys about this before, so much of what we think about in modern society is based around calories and macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbs. And those are hugely valuable levers, but it's missing this incredibly large body of knowledge around micronutrients. That was how I got interested in the carnivore diet. And these micronutrients, in my opinion, are the real magic. They're the real spark. They're the real sort of ghost in the machine that either makes us vital or our biochemistry isn't working well and our immune system isn't working well if we're deficient in them. So how many of these elderly people are deficient in micronutrients? Many.
That's one of the reasons why, honestly, I've seen you post about this stuff. And then I see individuals, when they see you post about it, they're like, oh, these zealots are saying the carnivore diet's going to cure coronavirus. And obviously, that's not what you're saying. You're not saying the carnivore diet's the cure to the coronavirus, but you're just saying, hey, if people eat nutrient-dense foods, build a healthier lifestyle, they're going to be less likely to be able to contract, or they'll be able to fight it off easier. So I don't understand how something so basic is being so warped into another type of narrative. Yeah,
me neither. And that's okay. I'll keep fighting for it. And I'm glad that the message is clear, because I see those criticisms from people, and I don't want to ignore those criticisms. I don't want it to seem like I'm saying, hey, if you get coronavirus, just eat a steak and you'll be fine. No, that's not the case. And your diet isn't going to change whether or not you come in contact with the virus or whether or not you get the common cold or SARS-CoV-2 or the flu. But as you say, Nsima, it certainly could affect the severity of your course with that illness. And we'll probably get into this today. There are millions, and I think we can discuss how big that number is. There are millions and millions of people who will come in contact with SARS-CoV-2. And, the course of that illness, the severity of that illness is everything. Because some people have it easy and they move past it in a few days, or there are some people who are even asymptomatic, and some people end up in the intensive care unit on a ventilator. So what's the difference? That's the key. That's the key. What's the difference? And that's what we're talking about here.
Lettuce doesn't seem to be processed too much. So technically, could you be a vegetarian and still be protected or a little bit stronger to face, COVID and all that?
Absolutely. As long as you're getting the nutrients you need. It's very hard to do that, in my opinion, on a vegetarian plant-based diet. Very, very hard. And that's what I talk about in my book, The Carnivore Code. People will be familiar with that. If you're not, you should check it out. But if you look at plant foods versus animal foods, number one, animal foods have been incorrectly vilified for decades now. And number two, in terms of nutrient bioavailability and nutrient adequacy, it's really hard to get the nutrients we need from plant foods, which is why I kind of suggest in the book, plant foods are probably just survival foods for most humans. If you eat them in a pinch, that's okay. But generally speaking, if you want the most nutritious foods, your diet should be composed of a lot of animal foods. That's where we're going to get those micronutrients from in bioavailable amounts.